Hello and welcome to Chatz, a television podcast, season 9, Better Off Chats. My name is Alan, and I'm joined by the man who has a body like a young Mark Spitz. It's Magellan.
Hey, what's up? I pride myself on this body.
I love this body.
You could spit on this body
Mark
and then
Spitz.
eat off of it. That's what I say.
Ew. Who is he's like an Olympic swimmer, right?
I don't know. Who said that in the episode again? I forget.
The general says it to Ted.
Oh, yeah, you've got a body like a young Mark Spitz. Let's see if I'm offended or
Former competitive swimmer,
flattered.
9-time Olympic champion. You should be... Take that. He was the most successful athlete at the Munich Olympics. Oh, shoot.
Wow, he's toned.
He is toned. That's what swimmer body is like. It's kind of messed up.
He's got a nice unibrow as well.
Wow, yeah, the photos of him in the 70s. Wow.
Nice mustache. Nobody told him to shave that mustache for the water. It probably slows you down.
And then Michael Phelps tried to recreate a Mark Spitz photo. Ugh.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Oh, sure. I get. Ew, yeah. You ever think about Michael Phelps' like weird swimmer body? How weird that looks?
His body's so long.
Yeah,
like,
he's a long man.
Yeah.
I like swimming. I don't know. No matter how natural I am on the intro, as soon as it comes time to pivot even a little bit, I'm like, ah! Hi guys, it's Chatz. Magellan, how are you? We haven't done a lot of small talk in a while. What's going on, pal?
I'm doing just fine.
I think
I've said that before, but I'm doing just fine. It's sort of a gray day, kind of wrong side of the bed this morning, but I'm here and I'm having fun recording. I have a long weekend this weekend. We're recording a week in advance, so that's pretty nice.
I love that for us.
I love it for us too. I love us.
Whoa, I love this.
Yeah.
Has anyone? You don't have to answer this honestly if you don't want to. Has anyone ever
okay.
sincerely said I love this?
Not those words. I don't think so.
Okay.
Like this
moment we're in, this place that we're in.
Um,
Obviously, someone's been like, "Oh, I love this."
I mean, I'm sure that people have expressed that sentiment.
Sure.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody has ever kind of like pulled their head back and looked at me and been like, "I love this.
I love this."
Which maybe more people should do. You know?
Perhaps.
Although it can come off if it's like a friend or something, and you're having a nice lunch with a friend, and they're like, "I love this." It's like, who are you? What sort of body snatcher situation am I in right now?
Exactly.
I guess we just need to be more genuine with each other.
Well, you mean more genuine? People are always surprised at how genuine I can be if I have like the right energy, and I come up to them and I'm like, "Hey, what's up? How's it going?" They're like, like people balk at that sometimes. People are like intimidated by that power sometimes. But life is very short, Magellan, and so why not use your energy to bring positivity and warmth to the world and talk about television shows?
Okay, I'd love to. That sounds like a great idea.
Fantastic. Well, let's do it. We're here to talk about the 2009 sitcom Better Off Ted. And this week on Better Off Chats, we watched Season 1, Episodes 5 and 6, Win Some, Dose Some, as well as Goodbye, Mr. Chips. First up is Episode 5, Win Some, Dose Some. This episode was written by Elijah Aaron and Jordan Young, two writers we haven't heard of before, who I should have looked up before the podcast, and I didn't look up before the podcast. And that's where we're at right now.
Okay, I forgive you.
Elijah Aaron worked on Recess and BoJack Horseman and Raising Hope. Wow, what a weird career!
Nice, that's fun.
What a good career. And then Jordan Young, obviously, who could forget? The Jordan Young Institute. That's Jordan Young writer. And it's going to give me a writer who's young named Jordan, I promise you. Also worked on BoJack and Drawn Together. Oh my God, remember Drawn Together, dude?
Maybe they're writing partners or something on BoJack.
Yes,
I don't think I ever watched Drawn Together. I'm sorry, I can't go with you on that journey.
It would just be on, and I'd be like, I don't think I'm old enough for this because I was like 2 when it came out.
Oh, it's one of those dirty cartoons.
Yeah, it's one of those nasty cartoons.
Yeah, I've definitely seen ads for that nasty cartoon.
It's like
this is gross. I'm gonna watch my cartoons now.
Exactly, I'm gonna watch my real cartoons. Yeah. This was directed, as always, by Michael Fresco, and it aired April 15th, 2009. But, John, can you tell me what happens in Win Some, Dose Some, please?
I would love to. Sorry, I got distracted looking up Hamtaro. Okay.
As one does.
In this episode, Linda is accidentally dosed with an experimental drug that gives her bursts of energy and unexpected side effects. Ted and Veronica try to outdo each other while helping Rose with a school fundraiser. Alan, what do you think of Win Some Dose Some?
Oh, Magellan, I'm glad you asked. I don't know, dude.
I didn't ask how you were at the beginning of the episode, so I feel like I had to ask you at least this.
Oh, yeah. Questions welcome. Characters welcome. I'm doing okay. And I thought this episode was quite good, not amazing.
Okay. How come?
Because the competition stuff does successfully bring forward this this theme of Better Off Ted, that like capitalism and competition are inherently like evil and put people against each other when they just don't have to be. We fundamentally think that we are competitive types because we are presented with competition, but we don't need to be like that. There's an alternative, which is just cooperation and altruism.
Right, and I think what it's proposing, or trying to propose, is
marriage.
Is marriage, yes, please marry me. Is that, you know, the characters who are competitive, like Ted and Veronica, would say that it brings out the best in people, and I think this episode is trying to say, like, actually it brings out the worst in people when they have to be competitive. But you know, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
So you thought it was good overall?
Yeah, I got a good amount of laughs out of this one. I feel like first episode syndrome, you're naturally going to like your first episode a lot, right? It's the rule. But I feel like I've settled into like, yeah, Better Off Ted's a good show. It's fun, and the little bits here and there where it changes are that's where all the meat is, like where it changes from the standard formula, deviates. But no, overall this one doesn't deviate too much. It's pretty straight down the line.
Yeah. So yeah, the theme of the episode, both laid out in the Viridian Dynamics commercial in the middle and by Ted at the beginning, is this idea of competition, right? And him sort of positing that competition is a good thing. Businesses need competition. The commercial in the middle is like, it gives us great things like pills that look like candy. Or my favorite one was like a new hurricane-proof breed of dog or something like that.
Hey, finally.
Yeah, and so kind of a central idea of the episode, is making fun of people who think competition is good. And I'm wondering what you thought about like how this episode kind of made its point. Do you feel like it successfully satirized competition?
Well, so to run down the basic plot of it, like when we get into the Ted and Veronica plot, Rose, Ted's daughter, has a competition that she has at her school where she has to sell a bunch of Christmas wrapping paper because presumably getting close to the holiday season, I guess. And she's trying to beat everybody else in her class, but she finds out that one of the students is disabled and she feels bad and is getting teased at school for doing that. So she's like, I don't want to win anymore. And Ted's like, no, it's only fair if we still compete against her like she's like everyone else. Which is true in theory. It's a little bit big of a concept for a child to understand. So I kind of take the side of Rose in this case where it's like, just let her lose the stupid thing. And he does end up doing that. He ends up basically airdropping a bunch of gifts to the military under the other girl's name. But yeah, in terms of like what that has to say about competition, I think it's just more like, yeah, sometimes you have to put your pride away and just be a nice person. And, you know, Fresco and then them we're saying like how much this series is about like separating the work and home life. And I think the competitive culture of Viridian Dynamics can be kind of toxic and bleed into your home life a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I've known parents who will use their kids like spelling competitions or, you know, obviously beauty pageants have a lot of like basis in the parent wanting to win things they couldn't win as a kid. So there's an aspect of that to it where Ted just likes succeeding. He gets a lot of satisfaction out of that, even if it's not for himself. So it's more about that conflict than it is specifically like competition is bad.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was uncertain about how I felt about like, you know, if we're analyzing Better Off Ted as a work of satire as opposed to a work of like it's a fun show.
Yeah.
I think there are times where the satirical points that it's making are somewhat muddled because it's not ultimately saying that competition is a bad thing. It's if that were the case, then the plot would be something like Ted is so competitive and he to Rose is like, you only sold 6. And then at some point she's like, Dad, like, this is awful. You're being horrible. And I don't like it when you're like this. And it would be more about the kind of the quality of Ted's where he's super competitive and how that like bothers his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And instead it just ends up being like, you shouldn't be competitive against a disabled person. And that's like where the line is drawn, which to me felt
Not great.
it felt not great. Yeah. Because then it's not about Ted being introspective that much about his competitiveness. He sort of is, because he's like, oh, I was really going to crush this girl, but now I'm not going to. But it still is this very circumstantial thing that ultimately, like you were saying, maybe you should just compete with everybody equally and not be sort of like, I don't know, condescending about letting people win.
Well, I think what's important is that Rose doesn't tell him, like, I don't want to beat this girl because she's in a wheelchair. She says it's because people are like teasing
Right.
me for trying to beat a girl who's in a wheelchair.
Right.
So she's like more worried about the societal implication of doing it than she's about the moral. I think it's obviously a little bit of both, because we know Rose is a pretty moral character, but it is still for her like, I'm being made fun of by this thing that my dad is now making me do, which is a common crappy parent thing that you have to deal with, especially at like Rose's age specifically.
True.
Kids are mean, dude. Kids are very judgmental.
Yeah.
If anything, I think it's almost unrealistic to say that people are making fun of her for doing this, but these kids have like such a 101 moral compass that they're just like, oh, wheelchair, you don't do that. That's bad.
Yeah, but also, like I think I've said, I don't know if I've said in this series or not, but I recently watched through all of Malcolm in the Middle, and there's a lot of stuff with the character Stevie in Malcolm in the Middle where he has asthma, he's in a wheelchair, and like a big part of the pilot episode is a bully accidentally punches Stevie, and all of a sudden all of the students turn against that bully, like, oh my God, you can't hit a kid in a wheelchair. That's the final straw. So I think it's indicative of just, and I think where this episode kind of is successful in the satire is showing how hard it is as a parent to kind of teach your kids lessons about how to treat people that acknowledge the diversity of people's abilities, among other factors.
Yes.
Because those parents are all probably like, hey, little Billy, whatever you do, be nice to people who are in wheelchairs. And he's like, okay, Mom, I will. And Ted's agonizing over like that scene where he's talking to Rose and he's like, listen, we treat everybody equally. We don't treat disabled people different, but they do get their own parking spot. So,
they talk about all that stuff.
I'm giving you right now.
Isn't that treating them differently? Isn't that giving them special treatment? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I do think the episode makes somewhat of a point there of like, hey, as a parent, navigating how to communicate this nuance with your child is difficult, in part because adults also don't always have like a fully nuanced, respectful understanding of these things themselves.
Yeah, I mean it's played for a big laugh when they're like, he's trying to tell Veronica like, I feel bad about this, and he's like, I think this is wrong. And she goes, how should I know it's wrong? I'm not some Greek philosopher.
Yeah. Right.
And then he's like, oh, Rose says it's bad, and she's like, okay, then don't do it. And he goes, oh, she's no help. I taught her that everyone should be treated equally. She's like, all right, well then treat everyone equally. And he's like, you're not supposed to really do that. You're just supposed to teach it, which is hilarious, but also is the theme of like this. A lot of the series too is like, do as I say, not as I do. Look at the parenting technique, because he doesn't want to follow that. He still wants to win, but it's hard to circle that square when you're trying to be a good dad.
Yeah.
Is it this episode where they have? No, I think it's the second one where they have Rose. Like they have everyone come to his house and he like closes Rose's ears.
That's the next one.
Yeah, it's the second one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always interested in just in like the ways that Ted navigates being a parent to Rose and like trying to be good, but knowing that he wants to follow his base instincts more often. We've talked about that a lot. Like he's a little, I guess self-centered is the word, or just self-focused.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think this episode is kind of at times him at his most bratty when he's like competing with Veronica and he's manipulating people just to sell wrapping paper. It's kind of ugly. You're like, ooh, Ted, why why are you doing this? Why are you doing this sort of like tag team con job with Veronica on all the employees of Viridian Dynamics? So I didn't really like Ted in this episode
No,
very much.
definitely.
Yeah.
There's good comedy too with the wrapping paper gag and how they're selling it like, well, at first when they're trying to sell it, it's like he's treating it like the person buying it is being undercut, and he's like, we can't sell for that little, and the woman's like, too late, Veronica already promised me, and then they like high five because they're doing dirty business. But
Yeah.
then later, when Veronica's trying to sell all of the wrapping paper, she just literally turns it into stocks, and
Yeah.
she's talking about divesting and like it's going to accrue interest, and you'll be able to sell it for much more down the line if you buy a lot now.
Yeah, and the guy's like, "That's how I bought my house. Sounds good to me." It's like this is right as the Great Recession is hitting, so that feels pretty topical.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
People are doing making a lot of bad investments. But
yeah.
yeah,
And we're seeing those bad investments have their effect
or rather,
at
yeah.
this time. Yeah,
So like that plot, it kind of follows its path. I did think we need to talk about the general, the sort of like threat
Yeah.
hanging over Ted for this episode is either he sells. What is the ultimatum? It's like you either if
yeah.
Rose
So
wins.
basically, the idea is Ted makes a deal with Veronica. He's like, help me sell stuff for Rose. If Rose wins, I'll have dinner with the general. If Rose loses, then I won't.
And this is part of a deal, like a part of a military contract to I think they're talking about like nuclear ovens or nuclear
Yeah, they're
microwaves.
trying to sell solar powered ovens, but they happen to be like toxic ovens.
This happened to me. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Which is another example of the show being so casual about the sort of military industrial complex stuff in a way where I'm like, this is not cute anymore.
This is
guys.
depressing.
Yeah, this is really upsetting. But the thing with the general is that the general clearly has like a thing for Ted.
Ugh.
And he hits on Ted a lot. So yeah, I'm curious. We see a flashback with him, and then Ted ends up going with dinner to him because now that he's trying to lose, Veronica's still trying really hard to make Rose win, and he's like, okay, Veronica, I need you to stop. I'll go have dinner with the general. And then we see that scene. So what did you think of this general character?
The buildup kind of made me laugh, right? When they're talking about, oh, he like sniffs me, and it's like a little weird that they're hinting at it.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like once we got to the dinner, we leaned fully into the predatory gauge man trope, where he's like, you have such a nice body. And like, he's trying not to be explicit about it, but he super is. And, in 2009, you can see this as like skewering the military and the don't ask, don't tell stuff and all of that. Like, what if this gruff, like old general was actually like an effeminate gay, not effeminate even, but just a, like out gay
just
man.
Like very gay, yeah.
But in that way, that is such a harmful trope in media, which is like, he's doing this not at the behest of Ted. He's using it like the way an older film, maybe like a straight man would do this to a woman, where it's like, I'm going to have her to dinner so that I can like ogle her and flirt with her and hopefully get her into bed, like that kind of thing. Like he's ostensibly doing that to Ted. And I think, considering for the time, that seems a little bit progressive, maybe, but it really doesn't age well. It really just skeeves me out and makes me like, this is the kind of like subtly harmful, borderline like queerphobic type of like comedy that gives it a bad image.
Right.
So that bothers me.
Because it's already like an existing stereotype at this time, I'm sure, that like queer people and queer men especially are like overly sexual,
or predatory, and they're all in the or like everyone in the army is gay and like all this stuff.
Yeah, so it definitely, I mean, we've talked before, you and I, about how when you go back and watch Weekend Update from like 2007 or something, and you see like, I don't know, the jokes that they make are like, this person's gay, but it's totally cool, but isn't it funny that gay people exist? And it kind of...
We don't judge them, but people do. That sucks that people do that.
Right. So this kind of feels like that, where Ted's like, hey, he says almost word for word, hey, I'm okay with gay people, but he hits on me. And it made me think about, if we're sticking on the gender binary for a second, if you were
I always am, baby.
If you were to flip the genders of some of the characters in here, like if Ted was a female character and the general was a male character,
And
it
Veronica
would
was a male telling him to do this, by the way.
right, then it wouldn't be funny at all, right? If Ted is still male and the general is female, then that also wouldn't be that funny, and it would be kind of, I don't know, like, oh, this very powerful woman is hitting on me a lot. Like, I don't think someone would write that plot. And so it's really telling that they feel that it's inherently funny that they're two male characters and one of them is like so on top of the other one, you know?
Yes.
Like it's a safe comedy space in 2009, which I think just says a lot about how people were thinking about these issues at that time.
Yeah, it's quite disappointing, and I don't know if I could expect better from the show because already we have like Phil and Lem, who are like a really cool guy pal pairing, but the show never truly leans far enough into them being anything more than that. So it's just like, oh, I guess this is what we get, right? This is the representation that 2009 is here to give us, is this like predatory military man.
Yeah.
I do actually want to briefly shout out a line early in the episode that gave me pause, which is from Lem, I think, when they're talking about competition and they first pan over to the laboratory before we get into the B plot. And, they're throwing hypodermic needles at the ceiling. And, they're trying to count the points. And then he goes, it's still wobbling and it can't come out for at least a minute. Same rules as for losing your virginity.
Right.
What's the read there? I don't even know. It's nothing. It's a gag. I know. It's like not.
Yeah, it's
anything.
just a gag. I mean, I think it's just like these guys have barely had sex. But also, Lem had two girlfriends at once a couple episodes ago. So
exactly.
Who knows what's going on there?
Nick sent us a really great GIF of the scene where he gets like dragged into a room by the two of them. Fantastic work. But yeah, I thought that was really strange, and that brings us to our less complicated, but
I mean, you could also have like a queer reading of that line, is if these guys are sort of like closeted men who forced themselves to have sex with a woman when they were of virginity losing age or whatever, and it was like an unpleasant experience for them, but it's like, okay, I did it. That could also be what it is, but I think it is just like a gag.
I wish it wasn't a gag. Is really what it comes down to, right?
Well, we can have the reading that they're
that's what headcanon is for.
Each other.
That's exactly
it.
Yeah. But so they're playing with hypodermic needles, and Linda comes in to ask them something, and one of them eventually turns around and falls straight into her shoulder, her lady shoulder. Lem later refers to it as, because he pulls in, he goes, "That's your lady shoulder."
I laughed out loud.
They make a good point. Immediately, they're like, I'm thinking, oh God, tetanus. And they're like, we only ever play the needle game with clean needles.
Yeah, they call it the clean needle game.
The clean needle game, yeah.
With just clean needles.
Like, don't worry about that. This scene very deliberately is like, don't worry about her getting injected with a drug, and don't worry about her getting tetanus. None of that is the problem. Don't look at that. Instead, we'll put a bandage on it. And even though they call it a Band-Aid, which I was like, no, wait, I thought you guys know. Band-Aid's the brand. They put the bandage on her and she leaves, and then they realize that they put drugs in the bandage.
Yeah, that was such a funny bait and switch to me. That the whole scene, you're on pins and needles, and I think what really sells it is that there's so much cinematography invested in the needles in the ceiling, because they do that great shot where they're throwing the needles up and you're like looking at them and then swoop up and see it stick into the ceiling. And then there's that shot where the needle falls and you watch it flip in slow motion. So the whole time you as a viewer are like, oh my God, what's in the needle? And then they're like, yeah, it wasn't the needle. It was this other thing that you barely saw. And that was the thing. That was the big problem.
Right. All the setup and build up for the needle. And it's like, oh no. It goes like, when you told me we could make an experimental energy patch that looks exactly like a Band-Aid, I said we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's very suspicious. So Linda basically turns into me when I have a second coffee during the day for this entire episode. She's like super hyperactive, and not even just like energetic moving around, but like manic. She's like very happy. And
she's really up and down for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, which, speaking of harmful tropes, there's a pretty common trope, right, of like women in media being portrayed as quote unquote flighty, overly emotional, moody, and giving her a drug that does that, and then being like, it's the drug, feels like one step away from getting it, from realizing that that's the trope, but you still are just doing it.
Yeah. There was a weird line. I was curious about what you thought of this line where, so she has the first thing we see from her is she's like super excited in the meeting. She's like, we can do it. We're the best. And everyone's like, what the hell? And then Phil and them chase her down and tackle her. And it's like, she acts like it's a whole game or whatever. And they take the patch. And then the next time they see her, she's sobbing over a bagel.
Oh my God, that monologue.
This is actually really funny. When she's like, the suffering of the Jewish people, and they were able to give us this, the everything bagel. It has everything you would want in a bagel. And then she like snaps at them and gets mad at them, and she leaves. And then there's this line where Phil and Lem are like, do you think that could be related to the patch? And then the other one is like, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, this is the problem with always testing things on drunk frat guys. And it's like, what's the...
Wait, what was the commentary there, guys? Like,
yeah. Are you saying that Phil and Lem think that it could just be because she's a woman? I don't know if that was the read, or if they were trying to make fun of drunk frat guys, but they didn't do it quite right. It was weird.
And then she starts... The reason I think it is more sexist than not is then it's like, and then they go over her house and she's like baking cookies for them because like,
yeah, it's a lot of female coded things.
Exactly.
And then she like steals a baby from the next door neighbor.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Which again, plenty of comedy in there, right? Like the cookie stuff. I kind of liked seeing a new set, by the way. Yeah. I also, this is the first time I've seen a set in a sitcom and not been like, wait, why? How can they afford that? Because I do think that Linda can afford like a nice country apartment.
Yeah, that looks like her apartment.
Yeah, it's not like absurdly large or anything like that. And I'm sure she makes decent money. Mm-hmm. But it's like her neighbor or something who has a baby and she wants to steal it because it's crying a lot. And she writes her name on it. And then there's like a line later where she's like, it turns out you can't just have something by putting your name on it like a baby. And then Ted is like, yeah, I think you need a notary. You have to get babies notarized.
That was pretty funny.
So like, yeah, lots of like comedy comes out of this, but again, it really is just like Linda acting emotional.
Yeah, again, it is sort of, I mean, like something you can say for the general stuff is like some of those lines are well written for the joke. It's just that the joke is like deeply problematic.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is true of this plot where like Linda says some funny stuff, but then when you dig into it, you're like, they're kind of making her do these sort of like stereotypical female emotional things and then not really commenting on it. It's just this sort of romp of like, she has a drug that makes her emotional. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole thing. And it also is a bummer that it feels like they're just sort of writing Linda in however it makes sense for that particular episode, you know?
She's a little too inflexible. Too flexible, rather.
Yeah, because Ted and Veronica, I feel like, are pretty fully realized characters in the writing. And Phil and Lem have their thing where they're just like, they can be a little inconsistent, but as long as they're sort of like buddies with each other, it's fun. And then Linda, they just sort of write, sometimes it's like, oh, she's this sort of starry-eyed, she has a big crush on Ted, and sometimes she's like, hey, I'm the sassy lady who could do sex to you real good if you wanted to. And then one episode she's like, I'm really bitter and wish that you were jealous. And then this episode it's like, and now I'm on drugs, you know? And I feel like Linda is sort of the character who is the least consistent in the way that she's written, which is kind of upsetting.
I feel like I always end up liking the characters like that, though. I don't know why. I just like find myself enjoying Andrea Anders' performance, no matter what they put her in.
Yeah, I think she does a great job.
Yeah, but I definitely agree that it's a little tropey, and to just have like the girl be like that, it gets you a lot of good Phil and Lem moments though too. You know, like that's the sort of the good and bad of this episode. Is my hardest laugh of either of these episodes was when she's getting ready to take the baby. She's like, this ends now. And I think it's Phil who's like, he's like, Linda, you can't hurt a baby. And Lem's like, well, you can't hurt them. They're not indestructible. And he's like, I mean, it's morally indefensible. What if the baby killed a man? You and your moral puzzles. I just love them.
Yeah, I laughed really hard at that
cackling.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think Andrea Anders has a lot of fun with the sort of flip on a dime emotional changes that she has to go through. Like when she's like, I've been so emotional lately. And then they're about to say something and she's like, why don't you shut up and stop trying to analyze me?
They haven't even spoken yet.
Or when she's like gawking over Veronica's calves and then also mocks her for not having washed her hands coming out of the bathroom. And...
You got pee-pee on your hands.
Yeah. And then, you said before we started recording your favorite moment from that scene was when she's mimicking everyone, and then she's like, I'm Linda, this is what I sound like. And she's like, hey.
So, I'm Linda, I'm making fun of everyone.
So it's like a really fun plot to watch, but then, if we have to go through the exercise here on our critical podcast where we analyze things and think about, like, what's the message is at best kind of irresponsible and at worst somewhat sexist.
And she tries to get her comeuppance at the end because Phil and Lem try to give her something, or they finally get rid of the patch and think like, oh, it should have worn off by now. And she's like itching her back, and then she's like, can you guys check this out? And she like she glued a bunch of feathers to her back, and they can't tell, so they're like, oh god, did we accidentally give her the thing that makes her grow feathers? And then she, like, in explaining to them, like, what could happen, she's like, yeah, then maybe I would do something like, I don't know, glue feathers to my back. And they don't get it. And then she laughs at them and leaves. And, like, that's her triumph. And she walks away, like, itching feathers off her back. Deeply strange, but at least she gets the sort of one-up at the end of this, compared to everything else. I also just love when she's talking to Veronica in the midst of all of this. And she's, like you said, criticizing her for going to the bathroom and not washing her hands. But she like is like not flirting with Veronica, but like complimenting all of her like physical attributes. Like, you have incredible calves and you're so pretty, and like I can make my hair look like yours. I'm like, oh my god, I'm Veronica and I'm hot and I'm like really talented. And I'm like, does Linda have like a low-key crush on Veronica that she's not talking about?
Well, and then the episode ends with Veronica being like, you're obsessed with me, Linda. I like that about you.
Right, because no matter how much she insults her, she's like, all I remember is that you said my calves are nice. Like,
yeah, that was funny.
She only knows how to take the compliments, which I wish I could be like that. I idolize Veronica in a lot of ways, but hey, that's how it goes. And I think the only other like avenue of comedy that I really liked in this one was like Veronica and Ted's back and forth as they're doing like the rose gift wrapping stuff. And every time they try to be like, all right, you're going to be Batman, I'm going to be Robin. She's like, nope, but I'm Batman. And he's like, wait, then and she's like, I'm also Robin. And then later when she's like, oh, he's like, we're going to get in the ring and start like boxing it out. And she's like, I'm Ali and everyone else and Mike Tyson. And like, you don't get to be anybody cool.
Yeah.
Just like a child playing like pretend with his friends and being like, but I get to be Superman. And I win every time.
Yeah. It's this is a good episode for Ted Veronica shippers.
Oh yeah.
Because they seem to have some sort of bond that Ted doesn't really share with anybody else.
The bummer is that's like more of there's more fodder. I forget what the actual shipping term is, but there's more like ammo for that ship than there is just a Ted and Linda one, other than the Ted and Linda one is canon. But who cares about canon?
I'm starting to think that they did all that like Ted and Linda stuff in the first couple episodes. They just wouldn't have to do any of it again.
They just locked it in and they're like, all right, you get it. You don't need to see that anymore.
Yeah, they just very solidly were like, okay, let's make sure everybody knows this isn't going to happen. All right, now we're done.
Yeah, makes sense. And
I think that's why they
it would get in the way of the comedy more often or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the episode. Did you have any other stray lines you wanted to shout
out? The only other line here that I haven't said yet is when they're having the meeting about the solar powered ovens and they're talking about how the plastic leaches toxins. Veronica says, some days it seems like everything we do leaches toxins.
Leaches toxins?
I thought that was good.
Everything causes cancer and everything leaches toxins. That's very true.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, is that okay? Well, I have to have some lines in here. Yeah, the stuff about disabled people where they're like, we don't see them, we just pretend they don't exist. That's how we know that we're all about equality here at Viridian Dynamics. We don't even think about disabled people. Like the more and more hypocrisy towards the corporation. That stuff's fantastic. And no, I think that's basically it. And I really also liked that Linda talking about the Jewish people having a tumultuous history. It's a lot, but it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this episode. It's a bit of a bummer, some of the plot stuff, but definitely some good laughs and, fairly memorable. But yeah, let's take it to a musical break. And when we come back, we will be discussing Goodbye, Mr. Chips.
Viridian Dynamics. Individuals. We believe everyone is special, irreplaceable, and will follow the thing walking in front of it. That's why we celebrate all individuals, even ones going nowhere. Viridian Dynamics, because you can't spell individual without Viridian. And you. And a no.
Welcome back to Better Off Chats. The second episode we watched this week was Season 1, Episode 6 of Better Off Ted, entitled Goodbye, Mr. Chips. It was written by Becky Mann and Audra Seeloff, directed by Michael Spiller. Oh, hey, Michael Spiller from
Michael
Scrubs.
Spiller!
Wow.
The Spiller is here, yep.
Alan and I listened to a Scrubs podcast.
Can you tell?
The Scrubs podcast, in case you didn't know. It originally aired on April 22nd, 2009. And Alan, what took place in Goodbye, Mr. Chips?
Several things, Magellan. For one, a computer error may cost Ted his job, but Linda and the scientists in the lab come up with a plan to save him. Holy shoot. Becky Mann and Audra Seeloff both worked on another writing duo, Modern Family, The Real O'Neills, One Day at a Time, and Rules of Engagement. So they're sitcom people. And Spiller also a sitcom director. Yeah, this episode's it's a little bit different structurally for Better Off Tad. Better Off Tad.
For Bot.
For Bot. Yeah, this is a different Bot episode, if you ask me. It's just a little bit more focused. I think that gets in the way of the humor, but I also appreciate like a sort of like more plot heavy, if you want to call it that, episode. It's still funny. It's just very different. What do you think?
I thought that it was pretty good. For both of these episodes, I definitely like them more the second time I watched them. Because I don't know if I was paying more attention or I just noticed more things or what. But yeah, this one was kind of like not as laugh out loud funny for me, but it was definitely very cathartic because it focuses on this sort of like FU to the bureaucracy of Viridian Dynamics, and just those frustrations of like, why is this a problem? Come on. Just the whole thing centering around the fact that Ted's ID badge is wrong and he knows his own name and he's like, come on, just fix it. But the system has to reset and the badges and the HR and it's all like, ugh. And it's
really real
just
bureaucratic hell. This is a textbook example of bureaucratic hell.
Yeah, and you do wish sometimes that you could just sort of put all your problems strapped to someone on a jetpack and send them into space, and they would somehow fix themselves. Which,
right.
Is nice for that reason.
It's wish fulfillment, yeah. But yeah, I think like getting the scientists to help Ted out and all that stuff, and like the almost Ocean's 11 level of heist that they perform is really entertaining and gives everybody something to do. Kind of like lets you play with the cast more than we're used to in the show. It's kind of like these 6 people are the whole cast, and this is like, no, there's like scientists, and Dr. Bama is still here. We have continuity a little bit, so I appreciate it stretching its legs a little bit there. Definitely feel really weird considering that my job also works in security badges for government employees. So a lot of the problems that are presented in this episode are like kind of real and like based in a reality, but are obviously dramatized and made ridiculous. Like you wouldn't delete when the thing that sets it all off is that he's trying to get in somewhere and he sees that his ID badge says Ted Chips, so he's the titular Mr. Chips this time. And he makes a big deal about like I have to go request a new one. And the woman is like looking at him, and then she goes, "Oh, I just didn't hit anything, and it deleted your whole profile." Like that's the part where you're like, "This can't happen."
Yeah.
He goes, "What do you mean deleted me? Can you re-delete me?"
Yeah.
And then she's like, "Oh yeah, you got to go through the HR thing," and just his solution basically being that he will reapply for his own job, interview for his own job.
Yeah, and when he suggests that, she's like, "Finally, you're saying something that makes sense."
Yeah, you're saying something that makes sense. I love that. She was really good, just like playing against him really well.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, because he can't get into the lab to help out the R&D people, Linda is tasked with taking over for like leadership there. And she's not a leadership type, but she makes a point later that the reason she isn't good at it is not because she's not a good leader, but because she doesn't care about the job. So when it comes to like leading them to help out Ted because she cares about him, it's like she does great. They're really happy with her, but she just doesn't care about Viridian Dynamics very much. So she's like, I don't know how to tell you guys to do your dang job. But you get Phil and Lem, you get Dr. Bomba, you get the woman whose name I never got, the like Patricia, who's really fun. I cracked up every time she's like, Linda, dead people exist. People die, Linda. Ask my dead neighbor. And then because
she's like threatening Linda, basically, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Like you will die so that I can have Ted.
Yeah, exactly. And then
I think I did say last episode that if it was a woman who was the general hitting on Ted, it wouldn't be funny. But actually, I do think it's kind of funny. The whole Patricia is like madly in love with him thing.
Well, it's not as predatory. It's not as like gross.
Right, because the status is different. Because she like works for him as opposed to,
Yeah, senpai won't notice me sort of thing.
Right.
To use a crass metaphor. I like when someone is like, oh, it's Ted. He'll be there. He's Ted. He's more likely hitting a home run or stopping a robbery, which is like, if you looked at a picture of Jay Harrington and you're like, what do you think this guy does for a living? You would be like, that's either a baseball player or a superhero. There's no other option for a clean-cut white guy. I miss Dr. Bomba. I feel like this cast is just really fun. Like, I want to see more of Patricia and then Bomba, obviously. I would love maybe even a spin-off with just like the scientists. Because I think that there's enough interplay between the four of them that you could do something really interesting. Yeah. Because science people are so weird. Like, our best friend Jim is a physics grad student, and like he is not to say that he's weird, but he's definitely like an eclectic type, and that's one of the things I love about him. But every like science person I've met is like very obsessed with their craft and very like passionate about it, but that can lead to outsiders being like, "Why are you?" the way you are.
Sure.
So Ted gets... go ahead.
No, go ahead.
He's getting pushed out of his office by Jim for marketing, and then we get the Viridian Dynamics.
That scene, by the way, where he goes into his office, and then it's like, who are you? And the guy's like, they told me this is my office. There's actually a scene like that in the first episode of Andy Richter Controls the Universe.
Really?
Where Andy Richter goes into his office, but it's the guy who plays Phil who's in there, and he's like, they told me this is my office, so it's like
it's
kind of a different, and that's like how they meet, basically.
Oh,
so I don't know
like that.
if it's a reference or just a somehow great minds, because Victor Fresco didn't write this episode, so
maybe just because the Fresco Mike Fresco or whatever was like,
I just thought it was an interesting connection.
But good catch. Yeah, so he realizes that he has to get his ID back, and instead of doing the application thing, he's going to shut down the whole Viridian Dynamics like power IT infrastructure. And
I think the biggest moment of like screw this bureaucracy is when he goes to Veronica and he's like, okay, I'm applying for my job, and she's like, okay, I have to interview you. That's how this works. And she's clearly, the end of the episode with her like saving the day clearly contextualizes this scene as like she just likes to screw with Ted.
Yes,
and
100%.
It's like actually fun for her to pretend that it's this annoying thing and she has to interview him, but actually she really likes it.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was kind of endearing on the second watch, where she's like, well, it's gonna take all day, and it's
other
gonna be
people
really
apply because they
humiliating.
saw an opening, so
yeah,
you have
and she's
competition.
calling him by his middle name, which is
Margaret's
spelled Margaret.
pronounced Margaret.
Yeah. And that I just thought was a really fun little interaction.
Margaret means Lamb of God. Yeah, I thought that she's just always fantastic, right? But yeah, the Viridian dynamics had this episode didn't like really impress me. It's about individuals and how we support at Viridian dynamics. Everyone can be individuals, even the ones who aren't going anywhere.
Right. It was just sort of a quick thing, and then the ending was kind of funny, but not fully in the voice of the Viridian dynamics commercials, where it's like you can't spell individual without Viridian, and you, and an L. Which is like a little too self-aware, I think, for those commercials.
I hope those don't get too weird, but it's a really hard thing to nail, like a fake commercial, and keep it funny. I mean, think about Bug Waffles, which is a thing you can listen to on our Patreon. But yeah, I'm curious, like how far those are going to get. If like in season 2, those are going to get really self-aware or what? I don't know.
Yeah.
But we get that stuff. And then we get introduced to the security guard, Ryan, who's really weird and kind of feels like he's on a different show sometimes. Because they're talking about how they need to break in. And the way that the plan is that Linda is going to distract Ryan the guard, who has Ted's badge at his desk. And then Ted's going to take it and use it to get into the mainframe or whatever. And it's this whole scene where she's like trying to be flirtatious, but she's bad at it. And she's like, "Oh, look at my boobs. This reminds me of the time I was in the shower and there was sorority girls."
The line is so funny where he's like, "You got a problem with your card?" And she's like, "No, it's these damn breasts of mine." It's really, really funny.
Mm-hmm. And also when they're planning the heist and they're all in plain clothes in like Ted's house, by the way. Except Dr. Bomba, who's in a fucking full suit. And
it was unsettling to see Ted in a hoodie with no socks or shoes on. Like, oh boy. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's barefoot Ted.
This is cash Ted.
And they have this like blueprint on the table, and they're like using Rose's toys to be each person. So Linda is like a Barbie doll, and Ryan the guard is like a fuzzy doll, and then perfect casting, Ted as a Ken doll.
Mm-hmm.
Ted gets his badge. They flirt with Ryan. She flirts with Ryan the guard, kind of successfully, kind of not. Talking about her boobs. Lem does like a really cool stunt at one point where they're like sneaking around, and he like jumps over some stairs.
Over the thing. Yeah, that wasn't a double. That was
not a cowboy switch. That was like I think that was the actor.
Yeah, there's no way it couldn't have been. That was just Malcolm Barrett doing that.
Yeah, just did a jump. Also the little touch, because they don't find the idea at first, and Ted's digging through Ryan's drawer, and he's a drawer just full of hot tamales. Just a really specific candy for a guard to have in his desk.
What was that? He also had a drawer when Ted opened it. It was just 2 gloves.
2 blue gloves, yeah.
What was that? He like opened it and lingered on it and then closed it. Is there something being implied there? I didn't quite understand.
He stopped. No, I'm watching it right now. He opens it, closes it, and then opens it again for a millisecond. Like, wait, what the fuck was that?
But there's nothing. Like, what could that be? That he has 2 gloves? I don't really understand that.
I think the mystery is funnier than the answer.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Like he used these gloves and then took them off and then put them in a drawer all by themselves.
He kept the drawer for just those. Yeah.
For some reason.
Exactly. And then he goes back to get his badge, and Linda's like, "Oh no, my boobs." They're finally about to get in, and then Dr. Obama gives everyone up, and he's like, "I caught them doing bad stuff. They tried getting past me." So they get caught. They think they're in big trouble. They're not. It turns out Veronica's cool. I forget where we go from here.
So then they all get brought up to Veronica's office, and she yells at them.
Yes.
And has that great moment where she's like, it's so fun watching Veronica be this sort of like prankster character, kind of, because there's the one scene earlier where Ted's like, "Come on, the company's loyal to me," or whatever. And she's like, "Ted, companies don't care about you. I learned that when I was like 8. And then in this scene, she says, "Okay, well, you've all disappointed me, and that's punishment enough." And then everybody gets up to leave. And she says, "I'm kidding. Get in here." She yells at them for 30 minutes straight. And then it ends up with when they go to do the launch for the jetpack, she puts what she says is a parachute on Lem. And she has this great line where she's like, legal asked for this. And he says, at the height I'm going, a parachute would be useless. And she says, not from a legal standpoint. And straps it to him. And then we find out that actually it was her plan to fill that pouch with ID badges. So that
75
when
employee
Lem
badges
goes
that
up,
they stole.
when Lem goes up and explodes, the computer is overloaded with illogical information, which is like the most Deus Ex Machina explanation of how computers work.
It's like that episode of The Prisoner.
Yes,
It's
right.
The general.
I feel like what people don't understand about computers is you have to kind of tell them what's logical in order to break their understanding of logic.
Yeah.
So someone would have had to tell this computer, like, hey, by the way, it doesn't make sense for people to go into the sky or for people to be in the same exact spot at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
But they wouldn't have bothered with that. And also, how does the computer know how fast someone could go into the sky? You know, it's silly. But anyway, it works. And then the computer reboots itself, and now Ted is back in the system. Because Veronica does this because her boss was like, hey, let's replace Ted with a business school student who costs half as much or a third as much or something like that. Yeah.
So I was just going to say, like, speaking about the badge tracking stuff, people think that that's like weird sci-fi stuff. And I don't know. I'm sure there are some, especially like federal government. I don't work in federal government, but there's like federal government badges that are literally tracked wherever they go. It's more like you can't tap a door with a badge without someone somewhere having that, knowing where you are. That's like for tracking reasons. And in the case of like a pandemic, that's for contact tracing. That's why. So you can track badges in real life. That's not sci-fi, but I don't know about like everywhere you go. Also, I just loved when he does finally, they do like turn the power off and they call it the reboot heard around the world. So you watch like the Viridian Dynamics building shut off from like a live action shot from far away, a building turn off, a space station turn off, and like an oil rig turns off and then comes back on. I thought that was really cool. Just like, again, reminding us that Viridian Dynamics is not a single office, but it's a mega corp. And then Veronica ends up being the hero, which I appreciate.
Yeah, that was nice. Yeah.
They get some there's a line in here talking about like whether or not he's capable of pulling off a caper, and she says he couldn't pull off a caper if it was sitting on a plate of lox, which I thought was brilliant. Yeah, and then they throw cupcakes off the 20th floor window, because there was a joke about a crash test dummy being tested by throwing it out of a window, and they're like, the window's still open, we're gonna throw cupcakes off and try to hit people with it, which is fun.
Yeah,
it's just like that Scrubs episode where they golf off the roof.
Right. Yeah.
Thanks, Spiller.
But yeah, this episode kind of, I'm struggling to think of really what else to say about it beyond that sort of summary that we just did.
Yeah.
Because again, you know, when you think about like the themes of the episodes and from a satirical perspective, what is it saying about business and capitalism? It is that sort of like light, flimsy theme from the Viridian Dynamics commercial of corporations don't care about you. But as Veronica says, that's like, duh, of course. That's such a basic critique, you know, that there isn't really a lot of meat to this one. And the previous one, I think, too, there's a critique to be had about competition and like the inherent badness of competition that the episode ultimately doesn't make. Whereas in this episode, it's just so self-evident, the thing that's bad, that it almost like isn't that satirical. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's just like Ted's idea doesn't work and we fixed it by going on a heist. That's it. Yeah.
So I don't know, but it is kind of fun to see the cast rally around him and like him. I do think it was telling when Linda asks him, how do you be a good leader? And he says all this stuff about like, you listen to people and then you consider the options and you make a firm decision. And she's like, okay, but what do you actually do? And he's like, well, people care more about tone than words. Oh. And also I have candy in my pocket.
When Linda's like, don't listen to the words I'm saying, pay attention to the tone.
Yeah, right. And then someone's like, Linda's tone is right. But, you know, that's telling about what the kind of the inherently manipulative side of Ted's personality. That, yeah, he likes the people he works with, and it seems like that is the point that's made at the end of the episode. But he also pretty shamelessly is like, yeah, I know how to make people do what I want them to do. I just sort of act confident and say things in a certain way, and then people love me, and that's just how it works.
Yeah.
And
Sometimes
that's
it just is that, though.
gross. Right.
So I had a couple of stray lines from this one that I really liked, just if you don't mind.
Sure.
When they're confirming Ted's last name, he's like, the woman asks him, "Are you sure it's Ted Crisp?" And he says, "I think I know my last name. It's the one thing my father and I agree on." Which is a really like layered line if you really like dig in and think about it. It's got a lot going on.
Definitely makes sense that Ted has father issues for sure.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that the scientists are attracted not by work incentive but by caramels, and so yeah, like when Linda's like, "I'm showing leadership," they're like, "Uh-huh," and she's like, "I also have caramels." They're like, "Ooh." They like walk like they're 5-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, I just again really enjoy Linda when Ted later is like, "You didn't really help Linda with the whole heist," and she's like, "Hey, my boobs worked their ass off." I like imagining that.
Yeah.
But that's what I got.
There was one stray line that I didn't bother to write down in its entirety, but people should go back and watch it if they haven't, which is there's a moment where Dr. Bamba is getting frustrated that everybody's wondering where Ted is. And he's like, "We're scientists. We're not people who study all of the variables in an empirical way
in a
to
controlled environment using theories."
to determine like, takeaways about things with particular events or whatever.
Yep.
Which is exactly what science is. And I just thought that was like
he's so good.
Ironic, funny line. Yeah, he's really fun to watch. And that little like salute that he does to Rose when she's like, "Oh, you're Dr. Bamba, right? You're the awful one." And he's like, "Haha, yeah,
hello."
That's me." I thought that was pretty charming as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this episode ends up being entertaining is the sort of like best thing you can ascribe to it. And it's not particularly, I don't think that there's anything particularly like intriguing going on here necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like good.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I think that brings us to our next segment. What are we watching next time on Better Off Chats, Magellan?
Great question. So next time, we're actually going to have a couple guests with us, which is going to be fun. Yep. And they're friends of ours who, if you're loyal Chats listeners, you've heard them somewhere. So you can sort of ruminate on that and try to think about who it might be.
Meow.
And with them, we are watching episodes 7 and 8 of season 1 of Better Off Ted. First, we're watching episode 7, Get Happy. A survey reveals that Viridian employees are miserable.
Shock.
And then episode 8, You Are the Boss of Me. Ted and Veronica try mingling with the worker bees with mixed results.
Love that Better Off Ted's the kind of show where I don't genuinely know if that means the low-level employees or literal bees. To me, that's a beautiful show.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, PSA for anybody who works in a corporate environment, if you are ever given a survey that asks how you feel about the job and it claims to be an anonymous survey, it is not an anonymous survey.
Yep, be careful.
Just be aware of that. And I haven't experienced that myself. That's just something I've been told that I want people to know in case they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in that case, John, I think it's time for us to bring it to the plug zone.
Let's do it.
We don't have I put all of our budget this season into the Chatsims bumper, so we don't have a plug zone bumper yet. But
okay, that's fine. I can do a bumper and do it.
Okay.
You ready for the plugs? If you would like to get in contact with the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can email us at chatspod@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, tweet at us, DM us over at Chatspod on Twitter. And in both of those places, you can send us questions, comments, suggestions, or if you would like to be on the show, we would love to have listeners join us to discuss episodes of Better Off Ted. It could be that you've seen the show before and you have a particular favorite episode, or it could be that you're watching Better Off Ted with us for the first time and there are just things that we're missing or things that you think you could bring to the conversation, or you just want to hang out with us. All those options are cool. If you'd like to join fellow Chatz pod listeners in discussing old seasons, you can do that at reddit.com/r/chatspod. We are nearing the end of a rewatch of Farscape, which we watched for our very first season of Chatz, a television podcast, Scape Chats, all the way back in 2016.
Wow.
Can you believe it?
No.
We've been going for so long. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And that also means that, by the way, there are years of other Chatz Pod shows that you can go back and dig into if you are new to the podcast this particular episode. Please, in order to help people find the show, consider rating us on Apple Podcasts or your podcast player of choice. It just helps for people to find us, and that helps us to have more people listening and things like that. And if you'd like to directly support the show with your cash money from your pocket, you can do so at patreon.com/chatspod, where depending on your tier of support, you get access to different potential rewards. So at $1 a month, you get some old movie commentaries that we did a while ago, as well as my currently running solo coverage of the X-Files called the Chatz Files. At $3 a month, you get 3 bonus episodes per month. They could be us piloting other shows, us doing movie commentaries, or us doing whatever we feel like. And at $5 a month, there are some old episodes that you can only have access to at $5. So $5 is for those Chatz Pod completionists and the super fans who we super love. We don't do personal plugs on here because this is the thing that we do. So, although actually, Alan, would you like to do a personal plug for another podcast you're on that just recently is coming back into existence?
Yeah, sure. Why not? It's not my official Chatsum, but I want to do an actual plug for another podcast that I'm on that just restarted recently. Longtime Chatz listeners will know that about 2 years ago, I started on a podcast with my friend Six, who called The Garnet Wager, where we watched this really awesome Korean game show called The Genius. And we talked about it every week. We watched all 3 seasons of The Genius, and then we brought on our friend Nick to talk about another Korean game show recommended to us called Crime Scene. And we ended that back in like March of last year. And we're back now with The Genius Season 4, which is called All Stars. So The Garnet Wager is back. We're playing silly games, and we have weird competitions, and there's like a little bit of lore and some weirdness. It's in some ways a reality TV discussion podcast. In other ways, it is an improv comedy podcast. But in all ways, it is a lot of fun, and I think you should check it out. It's called The Garnet Wager. It's found wherever you listen to podcasts. You should watch The Genius because it's an extremely good game show, and listen to The Garnet Wager. Thank you, Magellan, for this opportunity.
Yeah, of course. Also, every week, we like to give you a little something to snack on between now and next time if you're looking for some additional pop culture experiences. And we both have one of those, a Chatsum, as we call them. So, Alan, what's your Chatsum for this week?
Whoa! Six actually recommended this one to me, folks. I haven't had a good idle game to play in a while. I've been like getting way back into phone games recently. I don't know why. I'm just like getting comfortable and like playing games in bed. This game called Poke Clicker launched pretty recently. There was like a bunch of different versions on like GitHub, like the original developer worked on it. But right now you can go to pokeclicker.com and basically play a clicker version of Pokemon. And if you don't know what a clicker is, it's basically a game that you run either in a browser or on your phone, and it involves you simply clicking the screen to make things happen. In this case, you're battling and capturing Pokemon and going through dungeons and stuff. And it's got enough systems to keep you interested for at least a good while. Also, it covers like all of Pokemon, I think. Six was telling me that they got to Hoenn recently. So like you go through the routes and then you go to the gym and fight the gym leaders by clicking really fast. And you can also leave it idle because the game, the more you play it, the more, with other clickers, like it gets better at playing itself. So I left it on overnight and now I have a lot of money and I'm going to go beat Serena up real good. And if you like Pokemon and you want something idle to do while you're like working at your boring office job or something, check out Poke Clicker. It's harmless, it's free, it's fun, it's fresh. It's one of those. What about you, Megan? I like to call John Megan sometimes, guys.
I'm playing PokeClicker. I've defeated enough Pokemon on this route so I can now advance to the next route
Oh, shoot.
by clicking on the map. Okay.
Yep.
Okay,
It's got a good
great. I
move.
guess I will. Cool. So that's PokeClicker. For me, it's another Nintendo related free experience for those of you who have a Nintendo Switch. I've been really on a Mario kick lately, as I've been saying. I think I said this last week, but I this past week got really into Super Mario Bros. 35, which is currently a free game on the Switch that's available for a limited time. And it's created by the same people who made Tetris 99, which I've never played myself, but maybe people have heard about that.
Mhm.
But essentially, the premise of Super Mario Bros. 35 is that you on your Switch screen are playing the original NES Super Mario Bros. Game, and when you kill enemies in your game, they get sent to other people's games, and vice versa. And then it becomes this sort of like, I guess you could say, a battle royale experience where you are trying to last the longest as you're getting random enemies that sometimes don't belong in the world that you're in thrown into your world, and you're gathering power-ups and coins and stuff like that. And it's a really fun loop to go through and to kind of like test yourself and challenge yourself to see if you can win. And yesterday I got my first place finish, so
Oh,
it was
shoot.
awesome.
Your first Mario Royale.
Heck yeah.
Very exciting. Yeah, I definitely like Mario 35 a lot. It's weird. It takes some getting used to. If you've played like Super Mario Brothers and you're like, wait, this is not. You don't go to like World 4 in the warp zone in 1-2, and then
Right.
you
It's
actually go back
it's
to
not
World
about
1.
completing the game. It's about like looping through the easy levels, but very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're gonna get really good at level 1-1, folks. I promise you that.
Yeah. Right.
Or die trying. Also, Mario 35 is one of those weird Nintendo limited releases. So if you're listening to this after March of 2021, you can't download it anymore. So that's silly. Nintendo's weird with like their. It's supposed to be part of Mario's 35th anniversary. That's the whole like push behind it. But yeah, it's a limited download. So if you're hearing this after that, sorry.
If they honestly just Nintendo, if you're listening,
Hi,
if
I'm
you-
Nintendo.
if you put out a game that was like all of the NES and Super NES Mario platformers, and you could do this online multiplayer thing, I would buy that game.
Well,
I'm
that's
just
all. They're
saying.
all in the packs, in the NES and SNES packs, but they're not. I don't know if they're online.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's like because I have those packs, so I could play the games. But I'm saying if like this is a particular experience that I would pay to
For sure.
be able to have beyond their deadline date.
I just want to play. What's the best Mario game? Oh, 3D World. That's coming out eventually.
Yeah, next year.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. Now I have no other Mario thing to complain that they won't give me. Cool. Well,
Just
thanks,
all the
every-
Mario parties on Switch. If I could have a pack of all the Mario parties. That
But there already
ever
is one.
existed.
They don't want to take away from sales of the new one, even though it's boring.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Magellan, thank you, as always, for being the rock to my hard place. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to this episode of Better Off Chats. Peace.